Welcome to Going In Blind. I'm your host, Zach Tidwell, and my guest this week has spent her entire career working with some of the most vulnerable people in our society, from combating poverty to trying to end abuse and neglect and even child trafficking. Her work has spanned being the executive director at the Jefferson County of Human Services in Colorado, and even during Trump's first administration, she was actually confirmed by the Senate and appointed by Trump himself to be the assistant secretary for the administration of children and families under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Sorry for the clunky announcement. That was a lot to try and memorize, but it's now today, and for the past several years, she has been leading the nonprofit that she founded, the All In Empowering Futures group, which she is continuing to work and provide services for those who both are and have aged out of the foster care system, which is really a massive hole that is just in our social support system that I have only become aware of since becoming aware of her. So this is Lynn Johnson. But before I officially bring her on, I do want to make my quick announcements as usual. If you haven't already, or haven't read it already, there's an incredibly powerful story behind this podcast. You can head over to read about that on my website at zachtidwell.com. And if you've been listening to the show for a while or watching on YouTube, please subscribe or follow it wherever that is and leave a rating if possible. That just helps keep attracting these incredible guests. But with all of that out of the way, Lynn, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, that was a mouthful to try and get out. So, I mean, I'm sure you're probably very proud of your career, but if you're not, you should be. That is incredible. I think a good place to start here before we're kind of getting into how your organization came to be might be like there's not many of us that have been appointed by a president to serve in an office like that. How did all that come to be?
I'm an extreme thank you so much for asking that question, but, um, I am an extremely spiritual person. My faith is very, very critical to me, so I believe that the Lord led a lot of this. I spent 18 years doing probation and parole, where I, was a specialist with mental health, long-term offenders, and sex offenders, and then I moved to working for a previous governor to be his policy director for family and children, Governor Bill Owens, and then went to Jefferson County as human services. Because of my law enforcement work, my frustration always was that the human service system didn't work, or I wouldn't have so many people on my caseload. With that said, when I was kind of dared by the governor to apply at Jefferson County Human Services, and he said, "Let's really work on impact. Why don't you apply for this job?" And I said, "They'd never hire me." And I was hired. So from Human Services, we worked on poverty and we made Jefferson County the priority there was let's eradicate poverty. And so we did do work around poverty. First couple years, 1,300 individuals in their own houses, off the streets, no longer homeless. And we had such success that President Obama was calling us out. President Trump then wins, and I get a call asking if I would want to run human services through the Administration of Children and Families. And I thought, there's just no way. And my husband said, who gets a chance to impact changes for the vulnerable people? I said, but I'd have to move. And he said, you'll be fine. So that's how it happened.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna step back through some of this. We have all the time in the world, and I think this is some important stuff to talk about. And I even noticed it in your it's intentional language, even there, and in the bio that you sent over of eradicating poverty. I guess I kind of I find it hard. I think obviously you can make a big dent in it from my perspective, but eradicating it seems like a very idyllic, maybe unattainable goal, but I'm curious to see if you disagree with that and how so. Like you guys worked with 1,300 individuals, you said. What did that look like? Is there are these are homeless individuals that you're working to provide also the support that they need to get off the streets, and does that scale?
We did, in order for it to be scalable, was one, the entire county was involved from the sheriff's office to the public health department to everybody. With that said, the as we started to work on the how, and I used the words eradicate poverty, we ultimately named it the Jeffco Prosperity Program so that it was positive, not so negative. And one person did say to me in one of our big meetings, um, so the Bible says there will be poor always. Are you trying to prove Jesus wrong? And I said, no, but he wants me to try. So that was kind of how we started. My belief and the reason for saying it the way that I say it, and still do to this day, is that we've learned to accept status quo. We learn to accept whatever the federal government tells us we need to do for low income individuals, people who are homeless, people that are hungry, who are abused, who are scared. And we follow those rules and regulations to the T. And so what I think that does is it gives us a real average status quo expectation of success. But when I started at Jefferson County, there's a Head Start. And part of the Head Start job is to help parents get up and out of poverty. It was started in 1962 to be a poverty initiative, anti poverty initiative. And it's turned into between anti poverty and childcare. But so when I looked at it, at that time, Jefferson County was really looking at their Head Start as to whether it was successful or not. And we looked at what are the things that are missing. So there were 406 families in Head Start, 100% of poverty at that time. I went and asked them, who wants to help me figure out what we should be doing to help you get out of poverty? And 13 people volunteered. And I did interviews with each one and I asked the question, what would it take for you, not for your kids, but for you? And one young lady said to me, no one in my life has asked me that. It's always about my kids, but nobody said, what would it take? And that's how we started this, was with the dignity of people that they would write their own game plan. And what they would do is they would set goals they thought they could attain, and then we set the new goals. And like I said, over the first 3 years, there were 1,300 people who moved up and out. Their kids were in Head Start. They're going to school. We had on once a month we had dinners. They're still doing it to this day. I'm just not involved. But they would have dinners, they would have time where the parents can help each other. They became each other's peer community, which is a real critical component of ending that poverty mindset where people say, well, we've always been like this. We're just a number. We
Yeah.
were a number when we got food stamps. We were a number when we came into Head Start. We were a number when we were little kids in school. And now I have a name and I have eyes and I have a voice and I have the right to be not in poverty. And so that's how we started that. And so that's why
Well,
I use eradicate.
yeah.
It's whether we're going to eradicate it all, at least now we have a goal that's higher than the status quo.
Yeah, and this is, I forgot to tell you, I give you the kind of rundown of how the show is typically structured. I always forget to tell people, like, I might push back on something that you say. It is for the sake of conversation. I'm not like not picking you apart. And so but I think what you said there, I mean, not even what you said, what you guys did there is so much. I guess on one hand, I had Dr. Charles Drebbing on here, who was the chief of mental health at multiple different VA health systems, and he's been a huge proponent and developer of their peer support system, and it has huge outcomes in combating suicide in veteran populations. And obviously, that's you can see where that same level of success would apply to different applications, I guess. I'm redundant wording, but the like this, where you've got, okay, everyone as they are lifting themselves up and being, kind of shown how to lift themselves up out of this, not only can they lean to other people who can relate and maybe have navigated it in a slightly different way, but that will get passed down the generations because what you kind of painted there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that these, and I'm saying this, obviously, I didn't grow up in poverty. So I'm speaking from my understanding of what you said, not my own personal understanding. And I'm not trying to, you know, uh, put people in a box here, but it seems like these individuals who have grown up and like their family has always been poor, their parents were poor, their parents were poor, and have kind of been accustomed to being a part of our welfare system, almost get stuck with that being part of their identity. And then this has helped, you being able to open that door for them and show them this way forward, that will cut off that perspective as the children are seeing like, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
So
The
cool.
ability for an individual to believe in themselves after an entire life of being told you're never going to be more than this is powerful. And the community helping each other, we would have those meals and we'd go around the room and the kids would always, it was family style, so the kids would always be with us and we would say, "So tell us something good that happened this week." And it's hard to see positives when you don't have a car and you're taking the bus to everywhere and you don't have enough food and your food stamps didn't show up on time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the kids would say, "I got a sticker for sitting still for an hour." And moms would say, "I signed up for a class." And dads would say, "I'm working on getting caught up in child support and am now seeing my kids," whatever it is. But then the kids would leave. We had nannies that would work with them and read to them and help with homework. And then we'd say, "What are the challenges?" And what we found was it's really hard to take care of yourself when you're living in poverty and you have kids. It's just really hard. So
Yeah.
that was the first step to giving them back, like I said, their voice, their dignity. We've written it up. We've done evaluations. We've had huge success. One thing we found interesting, as you just said, I always talk about not about a safety net anymore. That yes, there's a safety net, but it's really hard, not because of the government, but because once you're in that net, you get housing, you get food, you get childcare. Letting it go and moving forward in your career is the scariest thing. Someone told me it's like I'm asking them to jump over the Grand Canyon. So I say there's a trampoline. It's a safety trampoline where you jump on it, you jump, you'll land, but you're going to jump right back up and we're going to be there to help you. And that takes that mindset away of I this safety net, we've had it all our lives. They are so good, some individuals at filling out those that paperwork, but go in and stay in that same job when you've got all these other life issues around you, it's really hard. It's not intentional.
Yeah. Well, and it's another, I mean, again, that the trampoline concept there instead of the net is so perfect in terms of what I think if it functions that way, like I don't think anyone would have a problem with that, right? I've had another guest on here, um, John Graham, who works specifically with uh, people who were coming out of the being incarcerated, right, and trying to help them kind of get the same leg up, and so they don't become part of that recidivism cycle. And he talks about hand ups, not handouts, same kind of thing. And I think where I sit pretty moderately on things. Like I believe in these systems again that the in the to the extent that they are functioning in this way, right? And where we are trying to help people get that bounce and not let them just sink into the net. And it's so I don't I feel like all of these kinds of systems get so much like when it's like anything else, right? When you do hear about them, it's a lot of it is in very negative context where maybe it has, the net is getting stretched further and further, and maybe it should mean there's money missing, and it's never the good side of things. But I mean, this seems like very concrete. You have very concrete examples of like it having functioned the right way. And again, that's an entire county. So like
Exactly.
that's not a nominal thing to have accomplished. And there you said they're still running all of these programs.
They're still running that, and they call it now they changed the name to Jeffco Prosperity Partners because it takes the entire county to help move people forward because you're building a community of success. And it's an area that I'm so proud of what Jefferson County does. And the fact that one of the young ladies who was in my program when I back before I left, she now works for a congressman. She went to law school and she was
What?
homeless. She was seriously homeless. I've had two young women who have gotten their masters and moved on at age 40, but they dropped out of school at 12. They were in gangs. And so getting a degree in college when you didn't even finish school after age 12, and they're doing it. The biggest thing we supported them with were tutors because that's a lot of learning you didn't have. And that's not something government pays for. So we raised our private money to make this happen. And we did practices. And I mean, the individuals, when I left to go to Washington, D.C., I remember telling the group and that they were going to keep going and, working with the new director. And a young man who had just gotten out of prison jumps up on the table and said, "You guys, this is great. We're going to Washington, D.C." And they're right because they trained me on everything I knew. They taught me how to give dignity to the most vulnerable of people in ways that you don't get from academics. And I saw it, it worked. And they did visit me in DC, but they also kept it going with this sense of community, which you mentioned John Graham. The work that I think I learned from this was when I first worked with the prisons and being a probation and parole officer. And then you go to human services and you say, how can I prevent these individuals from ending up doing survival crimes that end up in the criminal justice system and in our prison system? And so the cycle is, just goes on and on and on. And I felt I had a chance to try something different. I had great commissioners who said, be as creative as you want. Head Start's a federal program. I got to know the assistant secretary, interestingly, that I would end up being in that position, but I
Yeah.
got to know him and he was like, I love this. And so it was just a weird circle how this all went down. But the individuals, I still hear from people. They're doing great. And if they're not, they don't feel like it would be bad to call and reach out before they really get into crisis.
I think that that's a huge thing for people to learn in whatever context that may be. The asking for help thing is hard.
Hmm.
It is so pride is a very powerful trait that we have as humans. And I think it can serve you well in ways, but it can also be the Achilles heel with a lot of that stuff. And you were a social worker by trade, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so that's when you were working as a probation officer, that was still, you were already a social worker at that point. Is that pretty typical there?
Yes. I
Okay.
went into law enforcement in the criminal justice side as an MSW.
Okay.
And my internship was in the women's prison. And then I went out and was a parole officer and thought I'd retire in that world until that darn governor said, "Why don't you try doing something different?" And I did. And so the rest is history.
Even that, I mean, obviously you stood out to him for him to have had that conversation with you and kind of like challenged you to do all of that. Like
Yeah.
people were noticing your work even then, which is so cool. But with again, there's like 8 million different things I want to pick apart with you here. So before, because I'll forget if I don't do it now. What were, when you were asking these parents, what is it that you need to be like, what do you need from us? What would help you be able to achieve these things? What were the common, like what do you think the cornerstone of these families being stuck in poverty is with your experience doing all of that?
I'll tell one, it's a short story. One of the first people I interviewed was a woman who was fairly overweight. And if she saw this, she'd be fine with me sharing this. And I said, what do you want for your kids? And she said, I want a life for my kids better than what I had. I want them to be successful. I don't want them to be low income. I want them to do well. And I said, well, what about you? And she was one of the individuals who said, no one's ever asked me about that. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm doing these interviews, I've got this. And she said, I'd like to be on the show The Biggest Loser because I'd like to lose weight and get healthy. And I kept thinking, I have connections, but not that kind. So I said, talk deeper to me about that. What does this mean? And she said, well, when I take the kids to school, and when I went to school, when I was a little girl, my mom looked like me. And when I take my kids to school, I know that people are snickering behind their backs because their mommy looks like this. And then I'm on the 3rd floor of project housing. So when I shop, I buy the lightest things I can, which are chips or pasta, to get it up and down those stairs. So nothing is healthy, but I just don't know how to do this by myself. Fortunately, I was able to get a hold of people in that community, in that city. We got her a pass to the rec center, childcare covered, and a personal trainer. Well, it was great at first. She was calling saying this is the greatest thing she ever had. Then she called and there were a few 4-letter words and she said, "I'm never going back." Well, she had a personal trainer who was a former Marine. And what we didn't know at that time was that she had had a series of sexual assaults.
Yeah.
So when she had a male who was pushing her to work out, it triggered her. And we didn't know that. We were learning. And so from there, the good thing is people said, well, I guess your little project failed. Well, it didn't fail. What happened there is we were able to get her into a nutrition class. We were able to get her into counseling. We were able to walk with her. After that second year, she beat me in a 5K. She's doing great. She was able to go get a degree because she had confidence. She wrote her own degree from Metro, got a master's, and got a great job,
Wow.
moved out of poverty. But same thing with this same family, her kids were brilliant. And the schools just kept telling her that it's her parenting and the lack of nutrition, and that they just need to be held back, and she wanted them tested, and we couldn't get them tested. So we actually paid for the testing, and both of those boys skipped 2 grades. So it's the ability to say that there's nothing in the government that says this is what you do with a family to pay for testing. And thank goodness we have private money. But that story, those kids have been great. She still has a great job as a manager, and her husband works, and they have a house. But it started from I want to be on The Biggest Loser. And I just was thinking, this just can't be. This wasn't in any of my social work books. So it's that kind of thing that we got from people. We did get an older couple, total contrast, who were raising their grandchildren because their daughter was in prison. And they were in their 70s and said, "We just would love to have somebody come to our house so that we could go to church by ourselves because this is exhausting."
Mhm.
Well, we came to find out they needed a lot more than that. And we were able to wrap around them, get the kids help. They needed help because of the behaviors they had from living with their mom. And they're still that couple still, and they would be in their late 80s now, I believe, are still helping people in that project. And these kids, I get to saw a graduation picture. Beautiful. But you never know when someone asks you if we don't dig deep, or if we say, well, government doesn't pay for these things, so sorry, it's not our program. We said, all things go and you drive the car. We'll sit as a passenger until you ask us. And if you say, did I turn the wrong way? We'll say, okay, yes, you did. But we don't direct. We give them back their critical thinking.
Yeah, and agency
Yep.
is huge because I think that also has them or requires them to have some skin in the game, right? No one's doing it for you. You find your path forward, and we're here to kind of help tilt you back, like you said, right the course a little bit. It's so, but you guys were getting private funding for a lot of this. Denver in general is a pretty affluent area, like scale wise. I mean, do you have other counties nearby taken up that torch? Do you think that it is scalable? I get the money has to come from somewhere and it doesn't have to be private funding, but what's
And there really isn't government funding that gives the flexibility for the types of things we needed, like a tutor, the tutors. I mean, we paid a lot of money for tutors so those individuals could get degrees. But so that is an issue. I had worked in government all my life, and that's still worked in government all my life till I started this new nonprofit. But I did not know anything about fundraising. And so I started writing grants and bringing people to see what we were doing. And we were very, very fortunate to be blessed by the by grantors in Colorado and in the Metro Denver area, and individual donors, and they're still operating today. We had 4 coaches. We didn't use any case management. Those coaches, as somebody starts to become successful, they don't need 100% time from a coach, and so we've used the same 4 coaches or people who have replaced them, but we haven't had to grow huge just because we have more people, because we expect success of those individuals and that they'll always be helping as we move forward. And that's what's happened. They created a community of success that they do art and all different activities on those Wednesday nights for people, book clubs, so that they can learn and things they were missing, and to how to be a mother and when you didn't have one, and all those kind of things. So um, anything they want to do, we did, and it made a difference. And we also started the fatherhood program and worked with that in Jefferson County, and it just made a huge difference in the quality of life of human beings.
Yeah, I guess from the overhead, because I feel like what really could stifle something like that, and specifically you guys recognizing that there's nuance to all of these cases, is having too big of, the administrators being too big, where then, because there's so many people, bureaucracy then has to become, everything is systematic to it. There every there's a pre-written path for everything that may not fit everyone, but we will force everyone down it. Like, what was the structuring like on your guys's end to prevent that from happening? Because that seems, again, to be the exception rather than the norm.
Beginning, I would work during the day at the office in Golden, and then I would go to the Head Start in Arvada, and I would just wrap around, and do help get it started because we didn't have any additional staff, and it wasn't something I could say to the government employees, you need to stay late and help me with this, because we were just getting it started. Many staff wanted to help, and then we brought in an AmeriCorps volunteer who helped put things together, and then someone really, an agency, really liked our concept and gave me $50,000 to hire our first director, and then we were off to the races. So, but it was single-handed. Oh my gosh, if I have to stay one more night, but it was worth it, and getting to know them. That's why I said when I would interview and talk to the individuals, and now that I still get texts or notes, it's just so amazing that you never know when somebody's gonna be truly successful or not have. Everybody has challenges even after you're making a livable wage, but they have help, they have team, they have family.
Yeah. How often, whether it be the parent in these scenarios or the families, their family, like how often were these scenarios broken homes?
Oh boy. That would I'd have to pull up old data,
Like
but
more than half the time?
probably more than
Okay.
half the time.
Okay.
And I'd get parents who would say, "I'm a 4th generation no Head Start parent," and I'd say, "Oh dear, that's not that's not how this was supposed to work." That we had
Yeah.
forgotten the poverty side of it. We were just doing the childcare part. The other
Okay.
part, we learned a lot about helping children who are in trauma because of low income, homeless shelters, drug substance use, mental health. And we really learned to wrap around those kids. I think what the work they do with the Jeffco Prosperity Project overlaying the Head Start is fabulous. And I keep reminding the feds, "Go look at it, go look at it. We should take this to scale."
Well, I hope conversations like these, right? If the right person hears it, right? Someone in the right
Yes.
position. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause I mean, it's like, how can you not like everything? It's just, I'm smiling the whole time that you're talking about all this stuff. Cause it's incredible. And it seems so much more intentional than some of the nastier, story. Again, these are outliers that we hear about, but it's awesome. Where in all of this, and mm, you know, steer me back if I'm getting the timing of all this wrong, but it seems like some of this was also combating child trafficking as well. How does all of this tie in together moving forward into the appointment and everything else?
Sure. The a little bit different. with the human trafficking world is that I had a individual who was doing an internship with us who was actually being trafficked out of our building. And
Actively being trafficked.
her trafficker would sit over in our workforce center and watch her, and the sheriff had to get involved, and she was really awesome, but she had no control over her life, as we now know all the dynamics of human trafficking. But none of us knew anything about that at the time. This was my first case. I thought it was domestic violence. And then what I found out, and I remember telling the sheriff, if she had was a true domestic violence victim, she wouldn't be sitting in jail for prostitution, which is how we had to handle it, and we'd be able to arrest her perpetrator, and we would be able to get her help and find a shelter where she could take her kids and get out of the life. But we didn't have any of that at the time. So it was such a talking to the child welfare workers, the children's groups. They were like, "Oh, we don't have that here." Well, now we all know, yes, we all have that there, and child welfare is a primary source for human traffickers to find young people. But
Because they're
that
vulnerable and need the
because
money.
they're vulnerable and they don't have anybody else, and they are sold the bill of goods that they're coming into a family. So that was the beginning of that, which got me involved with I went to some conferences, read a lot of books, started getting involved, and Jefferson County jumped on this as an issue and said, "We are gonna make do everything we can to stop it." So we talked to schools, the sheriff was involved, all of our cities got involved, their police departments got involved, and we then helped pass a law that a governor's commission on to end human trafficking, and that was created with a lot of our team. It was held at my building, and we just changed the face of this in Colorado because of that first instance of how come we didn't know this? This is outrageous. And I
Mm.
was horrified that this young woman was not able to get any I couldn't find any services. So it was that was real discouraging, but it also was encouraging that we have go-getters and let's get it done people. This was back in 2007. I don't think Colorado's changed significantly in that way. We want to do the right thing for people and we figure it out and we get it done.
Yeah. So I guess how did you guys find out? Did she get arrested outside of work and that's how you found out that this was going on?
Um, I received a phone call that said, "Do you know that you're running a sex trafficking shop in one of your offices?" And I thought, "Oh, this is just the most bizarre thing." And so then I, asked more questions, called the sheriff. She was this her trafficker was sending her out to the parking lot during her breaks. And it was worse than that, but that's how I found out about it. And she was just sitting at the front desk as a intern and it got really ugly.
Jeez.
And there's a lot more to that, but I don't wanna also be saying too much to
Yeah.
give away names and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That is, it's like, I guess was because you mentioned like joining a family, was her trafficker, and you mentioned kids, was that a husband or a significant other?
It was a husband who she'd been with since she was 14, so my assumption is that she was probably being trafficked, and then they had kids, and any crime that he committed, she took the rap. And so when child welfare or anybody else would look at that case, they would say, "Well, let's give the kids to the dad. She's just really bad news." Well, that now we know that is really the way it works in what they call the stable is that the trafficker just tells the girls what they're supposed to do and they do it. So that's how we had been involved with that family, and yet we did not know enough about human trafficking at that time or commercial sexual exploitation of kids, as it's formally called.
And so the stable is like the colloquial term for these kinds of operations.
For their home, wherever
Uh,
they live, they there's a stable of girls. So that did lead me in one of the offices in DC that I oversaw was the Office of Trafficking in Persons. President Trump made it a priority to try to really address human trafficking. He even made Ivanka Trump the lead on that. And so I loved it. I was like, this is anybody who's willing to go that hard on a tough issue and let us work it. I love the chance to do that. So I did, and that was all these things from the criminal justice to um, the trafficking to child welfare. I walked into DC fairly well prepared because of all the experiences I had.
which is kind of ridiculous. Like that, it's like, from the again, I've already your career is just insane. Like the amount of things that you've accomplished is wild. But I'm talking separately from that. Just the that was your experience in one county in one state, and it's still. I mean that would suggest that in other very populated areas, that's probably not, you know, an anomaly, right? Like this, all of this stuff is going on to that extent everywhere in the
Exactly.
United States. And
Absolutely.
I talked with a guy, Mario Duarte runs an organization called Project Dynamo. They started out exfiltrating Americans and American allies from conflict zones. This started after the Afghanistan pullout left a bunch
Yep,
of
yep, yep.
Afghanis, and but they have an initiative now called Archangel where they're specifically working on human trafficking and child trafficking. And he said that he highlighted some of the prevalence, not with real concrete statistics on things, but I guess more so on the story side of things when we talked, and but did hint at in his experience on top of the trafficking that is very active in the United States, that there's also organ harvesting going on along with some of that stuff. And it was tough. It was a couple of things that he mentioned when he was on here. There wasn't there were there were claims without things that he could directly point to. And I'm sure some of that is probably the nature of that work and what they do. But in your experience, I guess maybe did you see any of that? And also, just can you kind of take the ball and run with it on really how big of an issue this is in the United States? Because I don't think it gets talked about enough. You get stuff like the Tim Tebow Foundation kind of is probably like the more prominent one that you hear about that combats some of this stuff, but it is, I feel like with all the other chaos going on, it gets swept under the rug in terms of the where it sits in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I'll give you just a little bit at this point. We could go on, and I'm that person that's invited to a social activity, and they say, "What do you do?" And I start talking about all this, and then I wonder why I'm never invited back. But the
What?
but I'm going to give numbers, and anywhere you look online, you're going to find different numbers because they change. But it's approximately $92 billion industry domestically where people make money. You make money selling a girl or boy. Now boys are being trafficked very frequently, but you could sell that girl or that boy, that man or that woman, whoever it is, over and over and over. So why be in the drug trade or in the gun trade when you can only sell those things once?
Yeah,
So
they're
they've found that
consumable.
that's an
Fuck.
easier way to do it by selling people. So we do have to change some laws. So because how do you prosecute in a court of law that a person is a product and that you are illegally selling a product? So a lot of laws have changed, which is the good news. The
Hmm.
other piece that, and I think I get in trouble sometimes, but until there's no demand or a reduced demand, there will not be a need for supply. There's a reason that every tourist area, every Super Bowl, every big concert, they need girls because that's where people go looking for these people. And it's unfortunate, it's sad, but again, if we do nothing about the demand side, about why are people buying these kids, how do you end this? And I do think there are efforts to do that, but there's also efforts to, well, rather than fix this, let's just legalize prostitution. But if you talk to these women who that they are making their money by being a prostitute in, I don't like that word, and I don't think it should be even on the books, but that is where some states are going. And it's
Well,
unfortunate.
Colorado, Denver at least is looking to decriminalize it. I don't know if that got voted in or not, but it was at least proposed.
I talk to women. That's one thing as I did, whether it's the poverty and what I'm doing now with individuals who aged out of foster care. I assure you, many of my kids were victims of trafficking at the same time. I call them my kids. They're all adults, but they are my kids. And so when we do this work, they didn't start by saying, "Yes, I want to go be a prostitute when I grow up. I want to sell my body." It was survival and or they had a trafficker. So as we move forward with these stats and look at it, in the child welfare system, we know that about of the kids who are aged out, that 20 to 50%, if not more, will have been trafficked. And good 50% will commit crimes and end up in prison. So we know that there is a vicious circle around all of these things. And those are the things that I always start with the expectation of and it may be Pollyannish, but what would a perfect situation be so I can begin with the end in mind and work the game plan backwards? And how do we do it? And that's how the Prosperity Project started, and that's how All In started. And it was my work in DC.
Well, and that's really like the first principles mindset is boil it down to its simplest, non-derived, problems that you can break it down to. And so it makes sense. And obviously, I mean, it's again what you've pulled off. Obviously, you're doing it the right way. But I want to stick on before we follow along that. I guess some of the I guess I had never thought of like it sounded like you pointed to any yes, I'll start first. The 92 billion was all human trafficking, or was that just child trafficking in the
All
United States?
domestic trafficking.
Okay. With that, when you talked about it sounded like basically any even localized event, like a concert at Red Rocks, which is for people who aren't from Colorado, is a massive concert venue in Colorado, but like that draws in traffickers.
Absolutely. And
Really?
in Colorado, since you brought there's tracks in the trafficking world. And so I-70 is considered a track. So it goes across the country. And so it's broken into tracks on how law enforcement, both federal and local, address the issues and how they track it. Well, when you have tourism, because anytime somebody's on a vacation, we find that trafficking goes up. The desire to have other women or men that are paid for increases. So as you do that kind of look, you look at the places where those kind of things happen. And you probably saw over the last, I think, I'm probably going to get some numbers wrong, but last 20 years, there's been huge efforts around Super Bowls to prevent the trafficking efforts. There have been law enforcement everywhere. There's been undercover. So I think people are starting to realize that these things are happening. But on the same time, we still have the demand, and the demand is not going down. That's a
Yeah.
culture issue with pornography. And right now, traffickers are finding they can groom better on social media than the ways they used to by dating a girl. So we're also finding new ways and that we have to combat because of social media impact.
Well, even games, there's a very, very prolific game called Roblox for kids that has been like, over the past 6 months, I've heard it been talked about kind of ad nauseum that predators go on there looking for kids. And it's any form of warfare. There's always, one side kind of moves the ball forward and there shifts their tactics and the other side adjusts. And it's like this constant day. It's just, and at the same time, you have certain movements in certain educational institutions or by certain politicians to be lessening the penalties of these kinds of things and normalizing minor attracted persons and trying to negate the severity of what these issues really are and make it like this, oh no, it, it's a normal thing, it's weird, which that's its own can of worms of opening up where that may or may not be, or not where it may not be coming from. It is where it is coming from because this is happening, and I've had people on here talking about it. And but it's such it's weird because it is, you know, sex between adults is a natural thing that is always like that desire will always be there in it. But when you look back in history, it kind of seems like there's always been this underpinning of people who are sick and want to also have sex with children. And that has always been this, that's and I'm getting at this from the question of demand. I don't know that you can eradicate the demand, but I do think we can make it such severe penalties that we do make it not worth that effort. And maybe, I'd be curious, like, were you guys able to, or did you see the advent of any new, as technology is becoming more and more pervasive, and specifically the integration of, like baseline technologies kind of coming into everything, like how large language models are now being kind of tied into everything throughout our lives. Like, were there any big initiatives that are using tech to try and combat some of this stuff? I mean, like you've said, there's these known tracks across the country, and we know, okay, around these events, these kinds of things happen. So did you see any of that?
You see it. It is happening, and Congress has been working on this for several years now. We are seeing movement. We are seeing some new laws being passed. So things are happening. It's fun. It's fun to watch where we planted seeds, and we'll go all the way back. People have been trying to plant seeds around this for a long time to try to prevent or stop or protect and do prevention, do all those things. But now I'm watching Congress as they're addressing technology and the protections of kids from naked pictures or from using AI that looks like it's their naked body, but it's not. And so I love that it's being talked about. That's a start. You didn't talk about this 20 years ago when I had that first case. Nobody knew what I was talking about, and or I just was in the wrong circles. But now it is, people know what it is. And it's helped when you've had some of the movies out, the freedom movies, all of the different things that start talking about this, and people are aware. But a lot of parents are not aware that this is not just a low income or a certain area of the community issue. All levels of kids can be trafficked. And
Yeah.
and we do have to protect our kids.
Do you think, I was listening to a podcast when I worked out this morning, and it was two older gentlemen were talking. They were talking specifically about, when the difference of being latchkey kids when they were kids versus now. And it was making me wonder about, it's all like do you think this stuff was as prevalent back in, 50 years ago as it was? Obviously not, people weren't leveraging social media to do this, but the prevalence of predators and this trafficking and all these things, or do you think that because it's become easier to access because of technology, it's now a bigger problem? I mean, you mentioned porn too. What are your thoughts on all that?
I do think the increase of the demand is somewhat created by the easy access to pornography for children and for both women and or boys and girls to start thinking that's normalized behavior. And so it's created a different world around that type of behavior. I don't know if it was the same or not when I was younger. I don't recall it, but I don't know if anybody ever talked about it.
Yeah, it may have just been a hush hush kind of
Yeah, if it
thing.
happened.
Yeah. I don't know, it's always, I mean, it's one of those things that we'll never really know, because it is the question of, even if you did go back and look at statistics, like the way that they're reported now is way different. We have more
Mhm.
access to things now, but it's just, I don't know. It was a something I wanted to ask you when it came to mind this morning. But I've dragged you down a lot of your past work, and I know the last several years. And we can stay on that. This is all very important stuff, but obviously, I also told you that I wanted to talk to you about all in empowering futures. So,
Absolutely.
what's again, told me a little bit about this offline when I was kind of prepping you on the show, but like, you said 2021-ish, right? Around the end of your role as an appointee,
Right.
this thing started to shift for you again.
Absolutely. Um, I was really, really had just a wonderful experience in Washington, D.C. during a hard time. I was responsible for the unaccompanied children program and the refugee program. And at that time, about 15,000 young people were coming over the border. And we thought that was horrendous. The times have changed. But I was responsible for that, making sure they had shelter, making sure they were cared for. At the same time, there were 64 other programs, from the welfare programs to the child welfare programs, and a $67 billion budget, which I think is a little higher now. But that's huge when you're looking at this type of work. And I wanted to make sure that when you sit in a seat like that, and I mentioned my faith early on, that when God gives you the opportunity to have an impact for the most vulnerable people in this country, that you use it wisely, and people say things are better off because you were there. And I'm a firm believer in that. So as I was in DC working with my staff, both career staff and political staff, working with the White House, other other federal agencies, I took this common sense approach of working with multiple different groups to work together so we weren't all duplicating and wasting taxpayer dollars, which I thought there's got to be a better way. Because people keep thinking there's not enough money, but there's not enough money when you all do the same thing in your own silo. And that also makes it real hard for individuals who are vulnerable. The very beginning of my experience there was adoption day, and a young man was getting an adoption award. And after that ceremony was over, he followed me to my office. He said, I really want to help you. Well, he had aged out of foster care, 18 homes in 18 years. He had been abused in half of them and treated well in the other half. And he kept saying, you're not going to be able to change policy if you haven't walked in our shoes. So I asked him to create an engagement team of young people who had aged out of the foster care system. So we had some 20 young people who agreed to do this throughout the United States. And every month I got on a Zoom call with them, and they guided me with, if we could only do this. And then I would go back to my children's bureau director and say, have you thought of this? Here's what the young people are saying. And so this young man stayed engaged. We did international Zooms. The one good thing that came out of COVID is we were able to do a lot internationally because of Zoom, which we couldn't have done before. But during that whole thing, then we also had George Floyd's death. We had COVID. It was one crisis after another at the same time that we were able to move some of the rules and regulations that box people into not being able to help vulnerable people.
Mhm.
So we did that. We lose the election, and I came home, and I just was praying, saying, "So Lord, I can't go back to my old job, and I'm not in DC, which I thought was your will. And so what do I do now?" And I just kept thinking, use the people that you met to influence and help take care of the most vulnerable people. That's what just kept going around in my head. And I kept thinking, this can't be for real. And I got a call from a kid in Indiana who said, Madam Secretary, I don't think you'll remember me, but I met you in DC. I'm going to Indiana State. I had to leave the dorm because of COVID. It was senior year. He would have been graduating. Went back to my foster mom, who was horrified that I'd been around people and maybe COVID. And so she wouldn't let me in the house. So I decided to go to LA to remake myself. And can I stop at your house on the way? I remember you said you're in Colorado. And I looked at my husband and I said, sure. So this young man drove from Indiana to my house, and he came in, and my husband said to me before he got there, "Do you know him?" And I said, "I think I know him, but I was working with all the governors, and I wanted all the governors to help. There were 127,000 kids waiting, just waiting to be released. Their parental rights were terminated. They just needed to be adopted, guardianship, or something. And I said, why are they just sitting? The 18 years, the 18 moves. I met a kid who had 60 moves, another 42 moves, different houses, different people. And so I said, we have to do something different here. Governor, that what you focus on will get done. Here's how much money you're spending on these kids that are just sitting. And I would show the governors. I said, "So will you be all in for these America's kids?" And they would say, "I'm all in." And we got almost all the Democrat governors and all the Republican governors. And I think I would have had the last four governors, except we ran out of time. But
Mm.
the but all the governors are saying we're going to focus on that. So they were all focusing. And that was 127,000 kids sitting. And when I left, there were about 119,000. Oklahoma, for example, had a couple thousand kids in their state, and they got down to under 400. Arkansas got under 100.
And
So
these
it
are
could be
kids
that
who
were just
just
sitting.
that are
Mhm.
still like still have not aged out but need a
Correct.
family. Okay.
Correct. And so they
Wow.
had a focus, and they brought the community, the nonprofits, the faith groups, everybody made that their priority, which, as you saw, that's what I started when I did the poverty work was the community owns the problem, not the government. We can all get it done. Well, so this young man, and I can use his name with his permission, Deshaun, actually, he was here this week, just stopped by to see me and my husband. But he comes, ends up staying longer than a week. And then he left to go to LA. And I called him after and I said, "Kiddo, you left your stuff here. Are you going to have an address that I can mail this to?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll get it when I come home." And my husband looked at me and he said, "You just got adopted." And I said, "Oh no, we just got adopted." Well, from that, he likes to hike, climb. My son does 14ers. And so Sean had asked if he could come back and climb with my middle son and do stuff in the summer. This was in January that he was there. So with that, he came back and he was going to bring a couple friends. Well, this network of young people that were all on that engagement call, and then they all know people, they all started talking that he's coming to hang out at my house. So he said, "Here's some more people coming." And then another young person called. And so I said, "Okay, 10 people. That's it. 10 people." Well, 25 people later, I was blowing up air mattresses under my kitchen table. All these young people were there. I said, "What's the one thing y'all want to do?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Um, there was a child welfare conference in Denver, and somehow these young people got a hold of other young people who had aged up that were at the conference saying, "Party at the assistant secretary's house." I'm going, "This keep be happening." Guys, chill. And so at about 25 people, they got to go to the mountains. I took them to Copper Mountain. They got to hike, they fished, and every night we sat around and ate s'mores, and they just loved it. Um, there's so many fun stories with that. The hot water heater broke. I mean, everything that could happen happened. And then one young man said, "Lynn, would you do this just for men?" And I'm like, "Do I look like a guy?" And he said, "No, but my dad abused us. He went to prison. I went to a white foster home. I'm a black man and I do not know how to be a good black man that won't do what my dad did. So if you could you do something something like this would really help us." So I move forward about a month and I'm giving a speech in Oklahoma and leaving. My husband and I were driving from there to come home, and a gentleman called and said, "I loved what you talked about. I have this ranch. Would you just come look at this ranch?" So I went and we spent the night there, and I just said, "This is our men's retreat." So couple months later, we did a men's retreat. 25 young men showed up there, and they did every guy thing you could imagine, including learning how to tie ties, how to budget, how to take a lady out on a date, everything you could imagine. And they didn't all know each other. And we had friends of alumni, is what I call them, a ton of men there to just be there with them. One gentleman, John, he's a colonel in the military. He calls Billy to this day every Sunday night to check in on him. And he doesn't say, "Are you meeting your goals?" He says, "How was your week?"
Yeah.
Billy is now accepted to 3 law schools. So what we do with
Wow.
this is by just being, we have no rules. We're not a program. We have 2 rules. When you come to Lynn's house, it's unlimited ice cream. It's just how we operate. And you have to be, you're just family. I mean, you just do not, we don't wait on you. We just hang out. And I know you can't see this, but your viewers can. On the wall over here is where people sign when they spend the night here. And it's about 100 signatures and notes to
Wow.
me It's my commitment that they should never sleep on on the street again, that this is a home and they know the code to the front door and they can always come back. And I know it's a risk sometimes, but like I said, Sean just showed up and he was here a couple days and he left this morning. Matt's coming tomorrow. So we just have these kids showing up. And so we started with the 25. We did the men. We did Indiana at Camp Crossley. We did West Virginia. We chased the flag in the middle of the night. It's a traditional West Virginia game. And then I did a women's retreat in Georgia and then Missouri. And I always try to do something cultural so they can learn something about the other states they're in.
Yeah.
And my favorite story, I think, is that in Missouri, we went to the Dolly Parton Stampede. And I had a whole group of new young people from Michigan. And one of our harder core kids from Detroit, he comes up to me and he gives me this look like almost ready to flash gang signs at me. And he said, "You did not pay for these tickets, did you?" And I said, "Yes, what's wrong?" He goes, "Oh," he rolled his eyes. Well, from there, we had a blast. It was awesome. And wouldn't you know that our waitress had aged out of foster care? It was just an amazing experience. And then that same kid came to me and he goes, "Lynn, I'd come back to this any day. Thank you." He'd been chased by a rooster at the time he said that. So I think he was a little nervous. You know, a city boy came out of him. But
Yeah.
from there, we're right now planning a Michigan retreat and I'm hoping to do something in Texas. I just need some help with finding a place. But now we're up to 200 kids, and it's my husband and I. I have a donation to hire a director, which I did. So the three of us are making this happen. We have a part-time, one of my best girlfriends going back 40 years, kind of does administrative stuff for us.
Mhm.
And one of our alumni is helping with external engagement. And that's it. We are a small but mighty
Wow.
group. And we're up to 200 kids. And my husband and I were just talking. We have talked to some 22 kids just this week on the phone, calling about car problems or wanting to send us pictures of their kids, or somebody just got married, or. And I say we only have two rules, real rules. One is we don't judge. We don't judge. It's really hard, but it is part of my faith. And the second part is we love hard. And the harder someone is to love, the harder we love. And all the hard things that these young people have been through, from being trafficked to being locked in cages as a child for 13 years, to the abuse is horrific. And I don't share all the stories because it's stomach turning. And yet I'm watching them buy houses, get married, get degrees. We have sashes that say we beat the 3% because our group is way over the 3% of kids who aged out who graduate college. Our group is doing it. And now we're focusing a ton of kids into the trades. I have a 55-year-old who keeps saying, "Will you adopt me?" I said, "I can't adopt you. We should be siblings, not adopt." Or I've got 18-year-olds and they all come with their own trauma. And so we love hard and we don't judge. And I'm really honest. And they'll ask questions about things or they're doing things that I'm like, "What in the heck are you doing?" And then I say, "Do you want my professional response or my mom response?" And they
Mm.
always say mom,
Yeah.
which is much harsher than the professional response. I don't know why they do that, but it's if you were my biological kiddo, this is what I'm going to tell you. And it works. It's working. And there's times that just like moms and kids in a bio family, you have hard times. Families get in arguments. We all do that. And then we all come back together for a retreat. And one young lady said, it's like having the welcome home hug that we never had growing up because we never had that one place that we lived. So I'm
Mm.
loving this. It's definitely keeping me young, and we are growing like crazy. And you met Steve and Ron Hartman, and I've been
Yep.
working with them with the trades. And we're just all over the country, just trying to do the best for these kids until we can't do it anymore. And that's
That's
the next steps.
I think the world of those two guys, and obviously that's when
It,
Steve mentioned you when he was on here, and that's why I asked him. I reached out to him and was like, "Who was that? I want to talk to who that was." Like it was just, or
yeah,
maybe it was Rob. It was one of them, maybe both of them. I can't remember, but I reached
yeah,
out to
I
him and I was
think
like,
I've
I
seen what Ron does with Kilroy's, and then Steve and I go way, 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 way back to, oh my gosh, 2000. And then, so I'm helping him with his board, and he's on my board, and he's met many of our young people, and he's guided some of them professionally and with their careers. And we're just even this Michigan trip, I invited 10 of the young people and my husband and several board members, and they just got back yesterday. They went to look to see if this retreat center could be used, and they all came back, but I got all the texts, why aren't you here, look at, I brought my kid, look at this. And it's just mom and dad, and the boys, young men, absolutely love having men guide them, because even in foster care, there's more women in social work than there are men. And so we offer, a ton of men that can wrap around them, and the hiking and the fishing and all these things that they heard about. But I laugh. I have a picture I wish I could show you, but someone was learning to fish for the first time, and he got that fish out, and it wasn't even an inch and a half maybe, and he took a picture with it, so proud that it was my heart. I just, and also one of the young men, we did a ropes course, and he got stuck on the top of the rope, frozen, scared. My husband doesn't like heights, and wouldn't you know, he was right behind him. 30 minutes later, we finally moved him to that to get down, and got him across the ropes. He came to visit us the next summer, and he said, I finished school because of what happened on that rope course. I learned that I can conquer my fears. Whatever we
yeah.
do, because we just do retreats, but if they play hard and start belly laughter, that tells me they've let their defenses down, and now we could start doing trauma work. But until that belly laughter, we're wasting time and money in many situations. So I just started, because of what happened at my house, I found that that works, and so we're doing retreats and retreats, and people talk about them. They're already texting, "Where's the one this year? Where are you gonna go?" And because there's so many kids now, that's why I'm thinking Texas and Michigan, and we'll split them up. But it's crazy. It's just crazy. They pushed my husband into mud pits. We do archery. I mean, they just we spent a whole day on a cornhole tournament because they never played lawn games. We had burgers and lawn games, and at the end of the night they didn't want to stop.
Yeah.
And I just think, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to think this is so boring. And yet it was the greatest retreat yet, was when we put ladder golf and cornhole out, and we were sitting by a lake, and it was all great.
You're almost getting to make up for lost time with some of that. I mean,
We're
obviously,
trying to.
yeah, which is so beautiful. And it's another thing. I thought about this a lot this morning, like that I've been, even over this past week, I was just up in Snowmass with the VA does a disabled veterans winter sports clinic every year, and I've never been, but I've been skiing and rock climbing and whitewater kayaking and all that stuff for most of the time since I've been blind. Like that, all that stuff was huge for me to get into that. And I was, knowing that you and I were going to be talking, I was like, I bet this would be something that is very, a parallel setting like this would be very, very impactful for these, young adults who never got to experience any of this stuff, not just because of, those scenarios are a vessel for, like you said, for the real work to be done, right? That is the delivery method to get people to open up to be able to start having some of these conversations, but also on the in the aspect of making up for lost time and just exposing them to some things that might be very, very healthy outlets for them, where maybe they haven't had the opportunity to explore any
Absolutely.
of that stuff before. And so the fact that, obviously, I like everything that you've said, and I can hear you smiling while you're telling this stuff the whole time, which just, that says a lot. But just hearing that you're even covering all of that stuff, to me, like, makes me so happy, because I know how impactful that's been for me, obviously in a different context. But it's just, I mean, you guys are kind of covering all the bases, which is just
Well,
so cool.
because we invite non-alumni, you'll have to come to one of the next retreats, or show these kids what to do when they're scared to do something. So
I would love
um,
to. Yeah.
you're more than welcome. We do bring quite a few people who are not alumni, because those connections are organic, and it just happens. And love, like I said, we love hard, and love just happens. And these kids just, life does get hard, and we've had tough situations with young people. And yet, they still keep coming back. They help each other, and we're okay. We're okay. We're going to get through whatever it is. We don't have tons of money. We just love hard. And so far, every retreat has worked out. We have been blessed with donations and free housing and just so much from our donors that I just leave it be. I'm like, if we run out of money, we run out of money. But right now, so far, it hasn't happened. And even the kids help. They're out there telling people and showing people what's going on. And they just shine when they talk about the ice cream every night. It's so silly, and we have toppings, and they just every night we have ice cream with Lynn. And there was a day I had a horrible day, and I walked in and there was 11 kids sitting around a table, and they went and got buckets of ice cream, and they said, "Come on, Lynn." And we were in a hotel. I have to tell this story. And we had been there 3 days for an event. And the next morning, the manager said, "Ma'am, are these your kids?" And I thought, "Oh no, what happened?" And he said, "We have never had young adults stay here who are as polite, interesting, warm, and caring as your kids." Well, they heard that. And it wasn't me telling them they're great. It wasn't me saying, "Aren't you awesome?" They heard someone telling that and saying that. So
Yeah.
then, of course, they had fun at doing the "Mom, I don't want to Mom." But it's what they felt safe to do, but his comment was genuine,
Yeah.
and they'll never forget that. So as we travel and do these things and we take them, yesterday we had a real opportunity with the Secretary of HUD was in town from Washington, D.C., talking about housing for foster alumni. So a group of my Colorado kids were able to go and meet the federal people. I didn't go, but they got to experience something that they never would have experienced, getting to go and see the officials from an administration. It's really exciting things for them. I always send them on speeches. We do with, not for, never for. But so if we're giving speeches, I take somebody with me. um, if Sean would have stayed, I probably would have had him sitting right next to me while we're telling all. I have lots of stories on him, but the problem is he has stories on me too. So it's just wonderful. And Matt's showing up later tonight, and so I'm just changing sheets real fast and getting ready for the next kids to show up.
I don't know how you keep up with it all. I mean, any of it from your pre nonprofit to all of this. It seems like you run just high RPMs constantly, but obviously you're thriving in it, which is, I don't know. I definitely would love to take part in one of these things at some point, or obviously get to meet you in person, but
Great.
I think honestly, just I don't know if it's registered to you the fact that when you ask, which kind of feedback do you want from me, and they say, the mom feedback, knowing that it's going to be more direct and probably more cutting than the professional feedback, like speaks to just how much they respect you. Like
It's
that is huge.
And I respect them. It's a respect that I don't think they've had growing up, especially if you're 4 years old and you're in a home and you're removed and put in a different home, and then moved and put in a group home, and then moved again. And then you try to get back with your parents and that doesn't work. And then you try something else. That is a world that I cannot even experience or understand. And that's the other part is they'll start really getting upset, and I'll say, "Tell me, guide me. I don't know what's the trigger." And it
Yeah.
does make a difference when I don't know it. I'm not an expert in this. I did not run child welfare. I had a person that worked for me that ran child welfare. And so look, that's why when I came home and I felt being called to do this, I'm like, seriously? But and they're having kids now, getting married, and I get to grandma their kids. They don't have other grandmas. And I'm going to a wedding in 2 weeks, and I'm going to a graduation in Oklahoma. So I'll go Missouri to Oklahoma and then go see some other kids. And my husband and I just said, those events we can't miss. And so
Yeah.
that's been the part that, wears me down. I'll throw this in. I was diagnosed 3 years ago with leukemia, and I went to the West Virginia retreat a month after, and I was like out of it. And so the kids just said, "We've got this, Lynn. You just sit. We're going to have a great time." And my numbers, everything's good today, but I'm still on the chemo meds, but they call all the time. But the biggest thing that happened was when they thought leukemia meant death right away. And that was panicking so many young people, but I wasn't going to hide it from them because I couldn't function. And so as we go through that, I've learned, they've learned to persevere because I've been fighting it and they're doing it with me. And so when they get sick or something happens, we do it together. And I didn't hide it. And I've been very vocal and I've slowed down. I know I have to, but it's things are good right now, and the kids are good, and my energy is starting to come back. So I'm excited about what's next for this nonprofit.
It is so wild. And so you're in remission now?
Call it remission with leukemia, but my white blood cell count is good, and all my numbers are negative today. They gave me a whole 3 months off before more blood work. So that's a
Okay.
great sign. And we'll see what happens when I go back in. And I'm hopeful that my numbers stay negative. That's the goal. So I don't know if they call it a remission with leukemia or not, but
Hmm.
we'll see. I just day to day, we will
Well,
figure it out.
you're obviously an ass kicker, so I'm not worried about it. But it's just
Yeah, some days not, but it's the goal is to not buy in to what society tells you you can and can't do for the most vulnerable people. You can stop and talk to a homeless person on the street and ask them their name and how did they get there and what do they need, not just throw a dollar. Know them. I knew all the homeless that slept around my apartment in DC. And it was funny when I left, a young woman came up to my husband and said, Mr. Lynn, you have no idea how much your wife helped me. Can I give you a hug? And I think you had his face just looked like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But it was so impactful to him. And I thought, how can I run human services for the country and not see the homeless that are sleeping on the streets right outside my apartment? And so I learned that it's people first. It's doing with them, not for them. It's it's faces, not cases, and my whole journey has led me to this. And now I get to love up 200 kids and counting until hopefully the child welfare system will figure out how not to have aged out kids.
yeah, I mean, it's do you have a few more minutes? Because I want to ask you.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Yeah. And I know I've taken a ton of your time already, but this is, because it is such a gap and it's not something that had ever crossed my mind until I reached out to you about that. Like that's what happens after when okay, you're 18 now. If they're, how do you, other than, obviously, I mean, there's the problems to address within the system itself that is its own undertaking. But how, if you had a magic wand to start moving some legislation in a direction to not kick these kids to the curb at 18, at least, like, at least do it in a way that's almost seems like the path of what you did in Jefferson County seems like it would be a great way to do this, where, hey, you are an adult now. We're going to treat you like an adult, but we're also going to be here to help kind of pick you back up when you stumble a little bit. What's what do
Absolutely.
you yeah.
I would add some other pieces, and every state's different, every county is different. But what I learned that these are the kind of things I wish I knew when I was a director at Jeffco, or I wish I knew when I was in DC. But these young people share with me, how is it that we have these young people who, and I'm going to use Josh, that's that first kid that kind of just followed me around when I was in DC. How did Josh spend 18 years, 18 homes, and leave without a driver's license? How did he not have his birth certificate? I have taught young people how to drive using my vehicle when they're here, and they're 23 years old because they leave the foster care system with no life skills. Go get a job, go get yourself a place to live, but you can't drive, you don't have your paperwork. And so why wouldn't they be on the streets doing survival crimes, being trafficked, substance use, and then their trauma triggers? So we have mental health issues too. And then people look at these kids look scary on the streets. Um, our kids, I say that we have, and that other individuals who do this work with aged out kids, they're the kids that no one wanted to adopt, is what they'll tell me, because they were had more problems. They had more triggers or something in their lives happened. So I had a young man walk in and he said, and I guarantee you in 6 months, you're not going to like me. Well, he's still part of the family 5 years later and we are good. But because I just said, bring it. And, but he said, failed adoptions, this, that, the other thing. And as you look at that, how can we have someone in a system from age 2 to 18 and not have a place for them to have stability, even if it's the same foster parent all those years? But to move people over and over and over, and then they move schools over and over, so they have no attachment. And at the beginning, I'm old, so at the beginning of my career, attachment was a bad word. And you didn't get
Hmm.
attached to your cases, and you didn't want foster parents to get attached, so you did move kids. We're trying now, we're realizing that the neuroscience and attachment matter, but undoing all those years of don't get too close to anybody is hard on these young people. And that's what I'm seeing is my first question when I meet someone new is, can I give you a hug? I do not hug. I don't touch until they say, okay, you can give me a hug. I have a kid who says, I never say the L word. And now before he hangs up on the phone, he says, love you, Lynn. That took 5 years. So as we are respecting these young people, we also have to remember that what they went through in the system, it's tough. I have a young man
Yeah.
who, for no fault of his own, they couldn't find a bed for him, so they put him in a juvenile detention center. What he went through there was pretty ugly, but that's they didn't have any other place to put him. And he'll
No
say,
crimes, and they
no
just put him.
crime.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
and that happens frequently. So it's those kind of things, and I just to end on a positive note, one of the young ladies, very first that came to the house that first time, 20 some years old, and she didn't know how to drive. And so I had just gotten a car because I had sold my car before I went to DC. So I had this new car, and I said, "Well, let's learn how to drive." So she did almost find every pole you can find. And we drove and we drove and she got to at least feel safe driving. So when she went home, she could study for the test and take it. She called, she was so excited, and she said, I went to the motor vehicle department and I took my test. And I said, oh my gosh, that's great. What did you do? And she goes, oh, you are a terrible teacher. I failed.
That is so
So
funny.
I said, okay, then. And she actually, 2 weeks ago, she now is a supervisor for United Airlines. She came out just to visit for 2 days and she was reminding me of that story. But it just makes me laugh that I should not be the one that is doing these basics of trying to find a birth certificate and so that these young people can move on with their lives. And those are the things, if I had a magic wand, can we give them everything they need? We should own their success because they grew up in our system. And I don't see that being the priority. And the reason I do it is because nobody else does. If everybody did aging out kids, I would not be doing this today. I kind of like to go where the gap is
Yeah.
because I don't need to be like everyone else. And so that's why I'm doing this. And we are ma- Melania Trump. She is her priority, foster the futures, is all about aged out kids. She has met my kids. She has talked to them. She has put money into this. And then this term, she's doing even more than she did the first time. No one ever heard of aged out kids. And now all of a sudden you have a first lady making it her priority. You can't ask for better. And it doesn't matter whether it's her or another first lady. These kids deserve everything we can get for them.
Yeah, now it's, however many people listen to this is another section of people that, okay, now this will be something that is in their awareness. Because again, I suspect this has not crossed many people's minds, just like it hadn't with mine. I mean, it's just,
Mhm. Or mine. I just when these kids started showing up at my office and then at my house, I was my husband and I were horrified. And now we're learning to be master fundraisers and master parents and whatever else. And we fail a ton and the kids still love us and we love them too.
it's awesome. I think I have some people to connect you with in Texas who
Oh, I
would
love that.
probably love to take up the torch on your retreat down there, specifically if it's a men's retreat that you do. So I'm gonna call him after we get off of here and see. But where can everyone find find what you're doing and hopefully support it after this. Because again, it's just uh, yes, obviously it's a noble mission and what you've accomplished is noble, but I mean, just you can hear it in your voice. Like I'm not even seeing your body language. You can just hear it. Like this is I hope this getting out there makes a huge difference for you and all these kids.
I hope so too. And it's I don't have to fake it. And other people that my husband will say he is a city businessman who never did a social work thing in his life. He's so hooked on this and the kids and the retreats and the other work that we do to help young people navigate adulthood. It's hysterical to me, but his words are, you come to a retreat, they are transformational, not only for your own life, but for the lives of the alumni. So we do invite people to come and see what we do because we haven't figured out how to put it into words because it's, as the young people say, it's magical. It's family.
Yeah.
It's chosen family, and we love each other. So people can get a hold of us on our website, www.allinempoweringfutures.org. And we have videos there to watch of retreats. We have stories from the kids and how you can donate, which is probably for me the most important part.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I think you did an incredible job of putting it into words here. So again, just thank you for what you're doing and thank you for coming on here and giving me so much of your time to go over all this because this is incredible.
It's an honor. Thank you so much.
And thanks everyone at home for listening to another episode of Going In Blind. My God, she's a powerful lady. Please go check out what they are doing and support it. And maybe after you do that, leave a rating and review for the show wherever you're listening, or follow us on YouTube because the stories need to be heard. Make sure you share this around and hopefully help spread a little more curiosity into the world and help some people out. But I will see you next time.